Hey there, welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And for now, it's one of the big ones, the last of our year-end list, the top 50 best albums of 2023. You know, I've talked before about how this list can feel most like a professional obligation, but truth be told, after a pretty intense emotional process of assembling my list of the best songs of 2023, sometimes there's a bit of a benefit that comes with professional obligation. The strong emotions, they're there, don't get me wrong, but they're dispersed over so much more art that, by necessity for my own categorization, it requires a more business-like approach. And hey, when the albums as a whole feel better, I sure as hell cannot complain. But you know what, let's get into that. Because the jury seems to be kind of split on whether 2023 has been a good year for music. In my opinion, well, as always, kind of depends on the genre, but I would argue if you were looking for the mainstream to deliver high quality across the board, you were probably struggling, with probably the closest genre to coming through being country, and let's be real, how much of that was even getting covered by a lot of my peers and colleagues? Did you even know it was great? But I would argue that just outside of mainstream promotion, both pop and R&B had really strong years, with metal delivering a sneaky strong year if you knew where you were looking, and of course country was on an absolute heater this year, following off of a strong year in 2022. Hell, for electronic music, I'd also say it was better than I expected. Same for similar stripes of punk or emo. But of course, the big conversation that everyone wants to have is whether or not rap had a bad year, and okay, in the mainstream, it absolutely was rough. I would agree with that. And I think if you struggle with this current thorny strains of underground rap that's critically popular right now, and you're not looking to dig, you're gonna have issues. Now, I personally did not have that issue, but I also have broader context. Because if you want to look at a genre that seemed to have an abysmal year, I think it was rock music. If you weren't looking in the weirder, less accessible, experimental pockets, or you just went for metal outright, this year was rough for the rock fans. But you know what? With all of that set up, and with the acknowledgement that, like always, there will be EPs on this list because I don't put them in their own separate list, a bunch of albums can have comparable run times to EPs these days, and let's be real, they've got to have a higher killer to filler threshold to even get close. I should also mention that despite covering fewer albums in 2023 overall, just under 200, I still had enough to comfortably flesh out a year-end list full of great music, and I actually had to make some cuts. And on that note, one album you will not see on this list is the newest no-name project, Sundial, where I could go in at length at all the baggage around that exacerbated by current politics and entirely too many publications putting it a little too high on their list for, let's be skeptical and call them dubious reasons. But to me, this is a lot simpler. It echoes what I said on my best songs list. She doesn't want the platform, and to make everyone's life easier, I'm more than happy to oblige. So with all that out of the way,
strike me down if I could. Family tie.
oh, so this is one of those cases where I'm kicking myself for getting to Charles Wesley Godwin probably 2 years too late. I don't think I've got a good enough excuse for that, especially for me. But while I think the extended runtime and single-minded focus can mute some of the greater impact, Godwin still delivers an excellently produced, very emotionally evocative indie country album where family responsibility is both the weight and the joy. Also features one of the best covers you will hear all year. You'll know it when you hear it.
No more of this. No more of this.
I've cooled a little on this Swans project despite being a very welcome uptick from Leaving Meaning. The extended drone/sound collage piece near the very end made it kind of tough to revisit as a whole, even for an act known for crushing length of song. But this album also isn't as crushing, probably one of their softest and most melodically meditative in years, as they reckon with the curdled blur of bluesy emotions in the wake of inevitable demise. It's strange to say this is one of Swans' most personal projects in recent memory, certainly one most reminiscent of their past, but it was certainly stirring enough to get here, and they didn't have to beg for anything. There are gonna be folks who think this deserves to be higher, and I understand why. Easily Jeff Rosenstock's best album, probably since Worry, with hooks for days and a more optimistic fervor to look ahead while not underselling the brutally difficult reality of trying to push for systemic change and then encountering pretty much everything and everyone standing in his way, both internally and externally, from society at large down to the friends who will let you down. And you know what? When the production pops so well, call it a refinement over a reinvention, but this is a journey through hell that is rather worth taking.
Chains of hollow. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. You got your problems, but it's always easier for you.
And you know, speaking of refinement over reinvention, I can argue that on the basis of Train to Harlem alone, Korine notched their spot on this list. But there's more to highlight beyond the terrific hooks and all the New Order worship for this throwback synth-pop band. The hooks in particular, they really pop with the more prominent guitar work, and while the pettier emo side of the content can wear on me, Korine can sell that melodrama, and that gives them a certain scrappy charm I appreciate. Not the only goth-tinged throwback synth act on this list, but even if I can't tell whether or not the title of the album is Tear or Tear, it's absolutely deserving. Funnily enough, these next two albums I covered in close proximity, and it's kinda hard to escape the feeling that there is a well-executed shift that you wish stuck more consistently. Jaime Wyatt is first in her pivot towards a very distinctive era of country soul that might feel a bit too familiar, but she's such an enrapturing vocal presence with ridiculously well-produced grooves and a lot of lived-in writing that would feel relevant either now or 50 years ago. It doesn't matter. Hell, the comparison is all the more stark and revealing. Now, the hook's cooling on me a bit is the reason it fell here, but for some swaggering queer country, it certainly does feel good.
Turn it on when the big man calls, 'cause he ain't gonna call you twice. And it's calling home for a telephone goodnight. Yes, you gotta be made for that.
Okay, look, it's not actually McBryde's fault that Music Row did not know how to handle Linville at all, and I'd be lying to say that a swerve back towards radio conventionality with Jay Joyce on production was not a bit of a disappointment. That being said, the best compositions on this album really do stick out, and it's helped this grow on me and knock it into a higher tier. A hard-living road album that features all manner of devils to be overcome, where Jay Joyce was actually smart enough to get out of the way of some of the better slow-burn ballads for once. And considering that Music Row doesn't appear to know what the hell to do with this either, whatever, it's their loss. This is still great. This album grew on me in ways I did not expect. Maybe it was that utterly wild conceit at its core, or how the sound picked up its roots from glittery emo and then rammed them into a much more diverse southern palette of Americana, or how the lyrical detail could feel so resplendently queer and visceral. But I think with Home Is Where, it runs a little deeper. When you have an album where the underlying subtext is the creeping numbness to facing daily trauma, where it should not be getting worse every single day, that's got resonance, especially if you spend any amount of time online. And yet the dogged drive to keep going forward and keep trying adds a certain bloody romance to it all. I was not sure this was gonna stick with me when I reviewed it. It's gonna wind up one of my favorite emo albums of the year. It's that special. And you know, on the topic of queer, genre-bending, thunderously visceral music, we have this blackened jazz metal project, where I'm tempted to just say liturgy done right and leave it at that, but that overlooks why this works so well. It's got a sense of groove. The eclectic instrumentation is actually well blended and not used for agonized migraine fuel, which also translates to more interesting and viscerally tactile writing. This was a project I didn't revisit a lot in 2023, but it's absolutely one that has only grown more rewarding as the year progressed. It's their best work to date, absolutely slept on. If you're prepared, you should give it a shot.
Sons of feeble lamb, oh, a weary land.
And you know, while we're on the topic of exceedingly strange and challenging albums this year, this is PJ Harvey really pushing the envelope into easily her most fey and poetic album to date, a hazy meditation of Old English, misty folklore, and pure nightmare fuel that serves as the thematic expansion to her 2022 book of poetry that could often feel just as obtuse when it doesn't horrify you to the core. It's got the feel of a fairy tale where the sexually charged paganism and dream logic runs wild. The side project that got a little too deep into the weeds honestly held up way more than I thought it would, lasted more than just a pure curiosity. You will not hear anything else like it in 2023. For once, that's a compliment.
Hot tide, it's been rising up. I've been getting up with some boys I used to know. We're trying to get our pockets up. This year has just been moving fucking slow.
Whereas here, how is it that Zach Bryan's EPs are just consistently better than his full-length albums? This has been true for 2 years in a row, at that. And no, this is not better than Summertime Blues, and there's no single here better than I Remember Everything. But in only 5 songs, Zach Bryan manages to weave together a haggard, touring love story with guest appearances from Bon Iver and Noah Kahan that quite frankly worked way better than they probably should, while still keeping to that ragged indie country texture, but also far more consistently produced. Now, I do find the ending a little bit thin, and like all of his EPs, has me wishing he could have a full album stick the landing like this. But you know, if this is what he gets when he's actually moving more slowly and carefully, I'll take what I can get. Tim Hecker set out to prove something with no highs, which is kind of weird to say about an ambient composer, but it is valid in challenging the low-effort ambient gunk that's clogged up streaming for years now. And he pulled it off with probably his best album in a decade, a project full of concentrated anti-climax built to unnerve and destabilize audiences that are looking to be relaxed or thrilled, a masterclass of building tension with every jagged synth and saxophone warble. Yes, I know, I'm on my ambient bullshit again, but in a genre built off of postmodern deconstruction, Hecker gives the double bird to the commodification and shows there are more layers to be torn down.
Can you catch my wave today? Spinning with me around. If you twist to what I say, I'll lay beside you.
I think this might be the latest entry on this list, and a great companion piece to Korine's album, but House of Harm stuck more for me. The mix is more robust and melodic, the whirling ambiguities of the dance floor hookups feel more charged, the throwback darkwave vibes are more burnished and smoldering. Yeah, okay, on the surface it doesn't appear to have a ton of dimensionality, but when the hooks pop off this hard, and the melodrama has some tangible theatricality and flair, okay, yeah, I'll play along.
Feeling elegantly wasted, like Cinderella in the moonlight. Who used to love me in the morning, just the way you do tonight, just the way you do tonight.
Sexiest project of the year? I don't think it's particularly close, with Karen Jonas delivering her best written, produced, and performed album since Country Songs in 2016 for a smoky and very adult slow burn project, drenched in cosmopolitan detail, but also earnest emotionality and a sense of tangible stakes in every deeply textured romance. Like with Tim Hecker before, this is the sort of album that isn't exactly immediate. It absolutely rewards someone taking their time with it, but for this sort of sound and subject matter, how could I ask for anything less?
I take my life pills one day at a time. My favorite thing to do is lie awake and panic and panic and panic.
God, this is one of the most pleasant surprises of 2023 for me. Ron Gallo returns with a sizzling, remarkably sharp garage rock where he broke through in the mid to late 2010s, along with a social satire that has just as much self-effacing humor and tangible empathy, has some more teeth this time. I don't want to say that Gallo lost his way with the throwback psychedelic experiments, which had some decent texture and atmosphere as accents to many of these songs, but look, when the hooks and writing bring back the muscle, this belongs in the foreground.
This rap shit done saved my life and fucked it up at the same time. Got pain in my heart, I can't hide. A lot of trauma inside, you can see it in my eyes. Could've ended in seconds. This time on my side, show must go on. Buy the ticket, take the ride. Songs of life with a dead dream. Think he made it, everything ain't what it seems.
Okay, full disclosure, I did not expect this would wind up making my year-end list after I reviewed it. Danny Brown delivering his most downbeat, haggard, and self-reflective album where age, drug abuse, infidelity, and lack of more tangible success hangs heavy over him, to the point where, in the context of the album, the kookier moments will not register as strongly, especially compared to, well, the other album this year. We'll get to it. But once you get away from the comparison, Quaranta is actually really rewarding, with deeply felt, honest recollections and insight, juxtaposed with slow burn but still sticky and textured production that's not getting enough credit, with more thematic weight in questioning what the hell all this is even worth, and then finding the answer. May have reached his 40s, but I only see more on the horizon.
Running out of fuss again. Tell me why I'm running out of fuss again. Running out of fuss again. Tell me why I'm running out of fuss again. Oh, running out of fuss again. Tell me why I'm running out of fuss again. Running out of fuss again. Running out of fuss again.
And yet on the flip side, we got an EP of utterly wild bangers careening with the sort of youthful energy that feels custom built for the festival. And I should know, I was in the pit at Osheaga where redveil played the majority of them. But I also think there are factors that have gone overlooked on Playing with Fire. Playing a game, but still doing it his way to maintain his freedom and autonomy, alongside his ridiculously strong melodic sensibilities and killer production. I know a lot of folks who slept on this EP thinking that it wasn't that distinct or special because he didn't default to the brand names or playing the game. I think he's run out of fucks to give with you lot. This kicks ass. In a year where I put out a 2-hour video essay and had a significant segment lionizing Texas country, I really should have just played this sequel EP where Randy Rogers and Wade Bowen team up again for some of their strongest work in nearly a decade. The two have always had great chemistry and a lot of rollicking charm, and this sort of project feels like the sort of summer celebration that leaves you wanting more. Plenty of humor, pathos, Texas pride, and barroom stompers to go around. This didn't nearly get enough shine outside of a very specific indie country circle this year. I mean, hold my beer. Let's correct that.
He said them Hayes boy, teach them that ain't now. Ain't no master of this man. Tell him what, oh, what he can't now. Ain't no master of this man. Master of this man.
Yeah, this also did not get a lot of shine outside of a very limited indie country circle, but in fairness, Pony Bradshaw is a sort of understated and layered poet where it might be more expected. And this compilation of EPs that was packaged into a project for this year was certainly quite challenging. The arrangements are warmer and thicker and feel all the more organic, but they're the songs with the tempo and cutting poetry that really require to sink in for every meandering but intensely detailed dirt road snapshot. Again, I'm personally a little surprised it made my list, but when so many songs here refuse to stop occupying my mind, deceptively difficult, but also difficult to ignore. It feels weird that after nearly a decade of being exasperated that I didn't fully get Protomartyr and their thorny, overwritten post-punk, they take a swerve near desert rock and they actually really work for me? And most of the fans don't agree at all. I don't want to say it's their loss, but Protomartyr did find something special amidst the wreckage and pedal steel here. An album all about facing endings and new beginnings amidst creaking and ossifying systems and a living death. Apropos for a band out of Detroit, especially this year, and I'm trying desperately not to jinx the Lions by association. They're thorny and cerebral, but with enough hooks to kick more ass than you might expect. Might feel a little short, but it packs the right punch. I'll take it.
Float on my float on this club. They hanging on and that goes down in my cup. Float on my float on this club. I don't step, I don't walk, I don't dance, I just float.
And speaking of stylistic swerves, it kind of breaks my heart how many people wrote off Janelle Monae and this project this year as they easily deliver their most free-spirited and direct project of their career. No, I would not put it among their best, but when you've released 3 seminal genre-bending R&B projects, you've got a right to make the breezy summer album that contains so much of the textured genre-bending experimentation anyway, and a lot of lyrical subtext converted into text. Perhaps it was a victim of poor timing, or an album that dropped on the exact same day with similar themes in the same genre that wound up being a little better and on this list. But The Age of Pleasure was a delirious blast of fun this summer. Easily holds up.
All day the curtains started coming down. I changed the second we were moving out. I guess wrong can look alright when you're playing home in a penthouse, baby.
So, quick note of clarification, I know that Kelsea Ballerini would kind of expand this EP in a separate release this year with a couple mixing changes and one more song tacked on. I'm sticking with the original that I covered here, and that should not be a problem because it's handily her best work to date, easily some of the best pop country you will hear all year. An EP chronicling the collapse of her marriage and the path to move on with some spare but cutting detail with remarkably well-balanced atmospherics where the influences, they don't overpower the heartbreak for me. Of course, Music Row slept on this. You shouldn't.
Admittedly, niggardly, I won't even give these niggas bad energy. I peep, then committed to memory. I sleep knowing these niggas is dead to me. I eat knowing I'm starving my enemies. The aperitif bittersweet, no pleasure. My heart pump ketamine. My heart pump ketamine.
So, on the topic of albums I did not expect would be on my list, let alone this high, I still feel like I fully don't grasp this Armand Hammer project beyond that unease and unstable dread lurking at its core, the feeling of living within systems and modes of discourse you don't quite understand, and they're not going to make it easier for the trouble, mostly because they don't seem like they're in full control either. I mean, call it Stockholm Syndrome for how many times I was pulled back by all the challenging production and every single guest verse that seemed to be goading me to keep going, or how I'm fairly certain this might be Elucid's best performance on record to date, or how, once again, Armand Hammer keep the quotables flowing anew. But if Haram was them highlighting the language to communicate amidst this increasingly messy reality, this shows the creeping dread when the language breaks down. I think I'm about to keep buying it.
Through the river and the mountain, we
by side.
But switching back from surprises to out of nowhere, the fact that Sunday Best not only got back together for a surprise album of terrific indie country, but also delivered all the same flavor, humor, and heart-wrenching moments, balanced out with older, newfound maturity, that was a genuine treat for me. This album is where the challenge is inherent in the title. It wants you to find reasons to embrace it as feel-good music, and then getting over yourself along the way. And be it the harmonies, the cajon, or the fact that they write one hell of a ballad, it gets me every time. So thrilled that Sunday Best is back.
Body count higher than a mosquito. With the body count higher than a mosquito.
And you know, speaking of surprises, at least for me, this felt like it came out of nowhere. Model actress delivering a riotous storm of tangibly queer and impressively visceral noise rock and dance punk that shakes the foundations of every hookup, where the nightclub debauchery isn't just presumed, it's guaranteed. And yeah, it bangs like you would not believe, shocker, but I also think that Model Actress gets a lot from the quivering, tender, but hard-living emotional pathos at the core, an album that knows a lot of its underground roots and celebrates them with careening abandon, even the softer parts. In other words, the album fucks. Get on board. I am more pleased than I probably should be at the transition, but here we are. Mess with them swinging for the fences with gloriously silly space-themed symphonic black metal, where the melodic hooks are ear candy for days. Decidedly less sexy, from a certain point of view, but when the blasts of synth and tremolo shredding are this potent, it's hard for me to complain. The funny thing is that Messerthim isn't doing anything all that different from the previous projects, but the compositional refinement, the increases in production, they have absolutely taken a leap over the years, and this, oh yeah, something special. And that is half of our list thus far. For the top 25, there's going to be a little bit more preamble and detail. Y'all know the routine. Let's flesh this out a little bit more. Number 25. I'm still not sure how to fully quantify my emotions around this album, and I know I'm not the only critic in that predicament as someone who was kinda underwhelmed by her full-length debut in 2020, but really liked this, and it was a total shock. And I don't want to chalk it up to getting a major label budget as the only substantive shift in the sound and approach, mostly because there is a little more going on here, and thus...
With these eyes, I know, with these eyes, I know, you got me hypnotized. With these eyes, I know, with these eyes, I know.
So as I said, Found Baby had an uphill battle for me. I really didn't like Amare's voice at first, and it's not like the content showing a lot of depth, but this is a classic example of knowing one's limitations and then adding as much flair and polish around them as you possibly can. The utterly gorgeous and diverse production that careens across R&B and Afrobeat, and then a focus on tighter hooks and more refined song structure, the vivid human melodrama, it just leaps off the page. Hell, I'll even give the writing a shout out for more subtle emotional nuance than I initially gave it credit. There is detail between the lines and flexing that shows some real emotional intelligence. It's a popular critical choice, to be sure, but for this brand of R&B, yeah, she gets it. Number 24. There was a time a couple years back where I was starting to get worried about this artist. Oh, he made great music in his very specific niche, but it was starting to hit a lot of very familiar notes, and the subtlest of change-ups can only take you so far, especially after a decade of greatness. I did not expect this.
And every time things start to go my way, I burn it down like a temple on Judgment Day.
Jason Eady swerving to make a straight-up country blues album, it kinda blows my mind. If you know, you know. And indeed, it's the sort of genre swerve that could have very easily backfired for a performer who is more known for his songwriting than his groove or feel. And to be blunt, he doesn't really have the pipes to completely sell this. But again, it's a case of understanding one's limitations and ensuring everything else around him is top-notch. The production in particular has a lot of swagger and color. It's certainly tasteful, but with a veteran confidence to not overplay his hand. And Jason Eady probably has some of his most adventurous songwriting since his self-titled album 6 years ago. I don't think Eady's gonna become a blues man anytime soon, probably better off for it, but I can recognize experiments that stick the landing. Highly underrated, excellent album. Number 23. Yeah, it's higher than it probably should be. Call it a case of the best moments carrying it, but again, when the best moments are this great, it's worth it.
I was suffering more than I let on. The tropic morning news was on. There's nothing stopping me now from saying all the painful parts I've lied.
In retrospect, The National had kind of a weird year, following up on all the popular acclaim that's come with the mainstream discovering all their influence with their poppiest album to date. And hey look, they got great pop instincts, and outside of using their collaborators a bit more effectively, this album had some sneaky excellent hooks, and then it promptly alienated all that fan base that expected more of a rock album, so they dropped a second, less good project this year in order to placate them. I used to think that if Berenger and Dessner picked the best songs from both albums, they would have the standout, but I also think the fan base is becoming so increasingly divided on what that would even fill in that niche. But as it is, Tropic Morning News guaranteed this project was gonna place on this list. I think a lot of the critique has been kind of misguided for a band in their elder statesman years that's trying to innovate, and this, still pretty great. Number 22. I came around to this album later than I would personally prefer. It was a critical darling in certain circles. I think the repeated recommendations from Not Real Music, go check out his channel, was what really put it on my radar. And yeah, in a year where house music came up with some real surprises, this was the debut I did not know that I needed. For a project that was mostly just built for dance, Sofia Cortez is doing a lot. Not only has her production picked up a swell in scope that places her near the bigger leagues, but with diverse percussion texture to create that expanse that feels international, but it's also reflected in the themes as well. This is an album where finding new communities across the world, it is central, but it also has the presence to demand others actually accept you as you, rather than subsumed to the family unit that would rather you be something else, where the difficulties of culture clash feel magnified and yet very human for it. A complete leap from her EPs. I still feel kind of late to the party with this album. It's a joy to take in every time. Number 21. Okay, I'll say it, I'm happy that Lori McKenna is bringing some real teeth back to her stories, because in a year full of great country music, I would not want this to get lost in the shuffle.
Go on and take me with you wherever you are. I hope I live on the road, in the town, in your heart. I hope I live on the road, in the town, in your heart.
I've been covering Lori McKenna since 2016, and I often feel a little bad when I'm as sharply critical as I am. She's still one of the best songwriters working today, a fearsome presence with legit classics under her belt. And while I'm one of the few critics covering her at length, I'm measuring her against those. It can kind of lose perspective. This is still top tier material. Thankfully, 1988 is really strong, taking her mature and deeply affecting looks at small town America and placing more of the stories outside of herself, where for as stable and happy as she's trying to be with her family, trying to influence and help others in their struggles can be trying in their own right. And the more heartland rock she infuses with the faster tempos and sharper hooks only amplifies that sense of urgency. It is a very maternal sentiment, but Lori McKenna has been making very maternal albums for years now. I wouldn't have it any other way. Excellent project. Number 20. But you know, sticking with those small towns and hyper-detailed, messy analysis that can get a little bit too real.
She's the daughter of a billionaire. She's the daughter of a billionaire. You wouldn't know it by her disposition, 'cause she comes back around, she comes back around.
This was the year that Underscores really clicked for me, and they did it by creating their own world that feels like a dark reflection of her own, but honestly, not that far afield. That makes it even darker. The sheer increase in scope is enough to produce Marvel coming from Fishmonger. The production and composition both took notable leaps as the sharper hooks just rip out from the blur of glitch pop, careening samples, noise, and offbeat Americana. But when you cue into the stories that are being told of the three distinct protagonists and all the dark crevices that Underscore explore in the melodrama and the thematic complexity, where numbness in an ossified and malignant system only papers over that nightmare. I mean, it's stridently emotional, distinctly unnerving. The boundaries that Underscores blows through seems to unnerve even her, but it's also layered and surprisingly accessible. This is Our Town disemboweled by Gen Z, and all the better for it. You will not hear anything quite like it in 2023, and the potential it showcased, mind-boggling. Good luck! Number 19. Alright, let's switch it up for something that might be a little bit more comfortable, honestly to the point where I'm still kind of shocked that outside of specific R&B circles, it did not get more acclaim. Has been teasing this album for years over multiple podcasts, where I knew, thanks to his connection with Emotional Oranges, it was gonna be good, but I was not prepared for just how much he could deliver. With an all-star cast of R&B crooners and great veteran rappers, what amazes me is just how much quality work and investment Rory gets from all of them, with a commitment to the thematic focus that is underappreciated. Like with Emotional Oranges, the focus on organic groove, that is paramount, along with the drama that requires some maturity to handle, as well as the emotive human reality of those who will slip up along the way. I would call it a showcase of great networking and impeccable taste, but Rory's also smart enough to know that leaning into the vibes, underplaying the grand wealth of talent, that's going to get him the discerning audience and cred that's worth a lot more long term. One of my absolute favorites to put on this year, and frankly I shared it with all my older friends who love great R&B. In the end, I don't know if I expected something different. I'm very pleased with what we got. Number 18. Sometimes you look back on albums and think, you know, if this had been released a little earlier or later, it could have ruled a specific season. In this case, this could have just ruled my summer of 2023 if it had dropped in June. But the benefit of house music, that when it becomes sheer pop ear candy, that lasts a lot longer.
She says, don't play that game with my heart. And don't say it's love if it's not.
Rami delivers her long-awaited solo project away from the XX, although Jaime XX swings around for a quick assist. But what has gone criminally undersold with this project is Fred again, who produced a lot of this, where even after seeing him live this year at Osheaga, I'm not the hugest fan, but he is a natural fit for Rami's soft-spoken yearning, for his shuffling grooves to make her queer love stories feel so immense. I've come to realize that my favorite house music is built for the festivals, and Rami and Fred again are a natural pair. It can feel a little slight in moments, almost kind of backwards looking in spots, but for this brand of mainstream house and indie pop, that kind of comes with the territory. I'll freely admit the promotion of this album did not do it enough favors, my review being later than I would like, that did not help, but this was absolutely joyous, and every electronic fan that I shared this with in real life adored it. That's high praise. This is special. Number 17. Yeah, okay, you can call me a fanboy all you want. The majority of you did not give this the time of day, much less get this album. I stand by that.
Cause it's a hurricane party, end days every other Wednesday. Live girls dance, dead men float, A hurricane party, gold dust, checks and Cardi. DJ says don't hold back because the water won't.
Dessa's pop experiments have prompted a lot of questions, mostly because she is such a potent rapper that experimenting in R&B, trap, indie pop, and even pop rock on this album felt like steps away from her greatest strengths. Hell, it's hard for me to disagree, but it's also part of the point. This is an album all about deflection, getting away from your emotional baggage, trying on every disguise that never quite fits until you're forced to confront the most raw, abstracted reality of where you truly are. And the fact that she managed to stick the landing on as many of the experiments as she did, it is something to behold. She's still routinely the smartest person in the room, but she's battling a lot of older demons, and this is probably the closest to putting any of them to rest, even if she goes to some rather weird territory to do so. And no, it's not better than Chime or A Badly Broken Code. You might not know this, but it's kinda difficult to surpass two of the best albums of the 2010s while you're still very much independent. In the meantime, even as a bit of a lesser entry that demands you actually put in the work, Bury the Lead is criminally underrated with a couple of the best songs of 2023. I stand by it. Number 16. And you know, speaking about one of the smartest MCs in the scene, delivering blistering meta commentary alongside the genre-pushing bangers.
Now the chorus and cover, I'm making sure niggas remember it's Tyler forever. Tyler for Tyler forever. Tyler for Tyler forever. It's Tyler forever.
I'll fully admit that I've kind of bounced around with this album in 2023 because it is brilliant in the gorgeous production, the jazzy flourishes, and McKinley Dixon showcasing a ridiculous amount of talent as a rapper was extremely gratifying for me to observe the rest of the rap world acknowledging more loudly this year. I personally do not think it's better than 2021's Landmark, For My Mama and Everyone Who Looked Like Her. I'm a few years away from declaring that project a classic, but it can very well happen and get there. But indeed, you can tell, like with Bury the Lead, McKinley Dixon is expanding on a lot of previous themes and iconography. But here he's also probably at his most accessible, and that matters, all the while making songs that can swerve wildly and deliver so much emotional resonance. I am thrilled to see he's finally getting the recognition he rightly deserves while still showcasing so much boundless talent and potential. Beloved, indeed. Number 15. When I was putting together my list, I was a little stunned this wound up so high on it. I mean, I'm so comfortable calling it his best in years, and he did it with a subtle swerve you wouldn't quite expect. I do not need to go off at length about A$AP Rock as a rapper. Where I will go off is how much he's improved as a songwriter and a producer. The grooves pick up so much more texture and eclectic swagger. His hooks have only gotten sharper, and he's embraced a much more conversational style of rapping that once you get a handle on the vocabulary, A$AP Rock's personal musics are so richly compelling. For an album that sets itself up to be examining technology, maybe even more of a concept album, the swerve comes in how it really explores technology as a philosophical framing of everything in the world that we would want to plug in and fix all the broken systems and things that fill our lives, but where raw, imperfect, often messy humanity has to do instead. And it leads to his most emotionally evocative album since 2016's The Impossible Kid. It's shaggy, it's frequently hilarious, but often biting. Billy Woods is an inspired guest choice, and with a dash of some brilliant meta-commentary to boot that shows A$AP Rock's wisdom and humility, this is a project that, despite the length, only grew on me. I'll repeat myself, this album is a solution to problems that we didn't even know we had. Number 14. When this album was first recommended by a friend of mine, she called it Spectrum Pulse Core. I'm not gonna say she was entirely right, but...
Just then I saw the risen king sitting in a boxing ring, and he was looking at me. I don't know what he was thinking, but I think I saw him winking, like he's thinking of me.
There is a part of me that wants to put Hamish Hawk in the same category as a Tenant from Zero or even Alex Cameron. Offbeat, almost deliberate throwbacks to sophistopop were impeccably composed and deeply romantic men with great voices and fantastic production go through existential crises through a lot of overwritten self-referential songs that are as hilarious as they are affecting. But Hamish Hawk's energy is different though. Maybe it's the Scottish side coming through and how the arrangements feel a little bit more prim and composed for him than to completely fall apart, and his knack for a lot of that detail, the huge hooks, and taking a couple more risks at his own expense makes Angel Numbers just endlessly compelling. Imagine your mid-80s crooner type having an anti-capitalist streak and a nervous breakdown, and you get this album. Fucking outstanding, slept on all but a couple of critics, highly recommended. Number 13. So I'm comfortable with the number of pop albums on this list. I'm not a stranger to pop music. I might have higher or unique standards for it, but when the genre's got a good year, I'm gonna reward it, even if the mainstream won't. And if you want, quite frankly, the biggest example of that fumbling in 2023...
Why don't you come over? Red wine supernova falling into me. Let's pick it up now.
I'll say it, Chappell Roan is a goddamn superstar, and this debut album proves it. A huge voice, great pop sensibilities that can play to riotous queer debauchery, and some genuinely tender scenes. Production that, quite frankly, punches above what I expected from Dan Nigro, and the fact that she was on Atlantic and they dropped her because they couldn't figure out how to promote her properly. I don't care if that happened midway through 2020. Somebody should have gotten fired for that. But if anything, that only helps contribute to this album's charm. It's a little more scrappy, it leans a little too hard into the theatricality that reminds me a lot of early Marina and the Diamonds, and that's a compliment, that's great. But a lot of the camp here feels authentic, and the songs are solid as hell to boot. All the leftover theater kids who became music writers, they utterly adore this album, and so do I. Can't wait to hear more. Number 12. You know, when I first reviewed the album, there was a part of me that recognized the accessibility of its winding structure and thought it would eventually cool on me, certainly not among his best. But over 6 months later...
Colorful packaging, Pac-Man, fly like gold on Africans, cover my tracks with backronyms. If the track slaps in the back, you can almost hear the black cackling. When it's my time, no need to pass the hat, just throw me in with the fire good and crackling.
Alright, let me state my claim. This is not my favorite Billy Woods album. I've got too strong a connection to Hiding Places and Church emotionally to really challenge that. And History Will Absolve Me and Ethiops are stellar in their own right for the dense themes and the impeccable atmosphere. That all being said, Maps is easily Billy Woods' most accessible album, by far his easiest to revisit, and guess what only kept growing on me with time and more repeated listens. Kenny Siegel's production is shambling and ramshackle, but it's got a lot of subtle melodic character to really balance out the grit and some of the darkness, and Billy Woods is once again endlessly entertaining as a writer for his observational travelogue, even before you get to the real emotional resonance that highlights how said Maps must eventually take him home, where the personal journey is the undercurrent that makes every strange misadventure and detour pick up some weight. Everyone has already told you that this is one of the best rap albums to drop in 2023. Quite frankly, I'm just happy I got Billy Woods enough years ago in order to join the party. Number 11. So I said before that when this album made my mid-year list, I was making up for lost time, because quite frankly, her debut should have made my list back in 2019. Hell, going back to her first project before she went solo, maybe those albums deserve another proper look as well. But regardless, while it dropped well early of its season, this was my album of the summer. It was glorious. I hope all of you you get that when I complain about the pop charts and how listless and underwhelming they can be, I'm not speaking in the vacuum with just the context informed by chart history. No. I'm also looking at Carolyn Polachek dropping an album of absolute pop bangers where she made a play for real accessibility with wild diversity in the instrumentation and composition and real pop flair in the duel between the ego and the superego, and wondering who the fuck fumbled the ball. I don't even know what to even say at this point. A lot of the critics adore it, and for good reason. Carolyn Polachek has her proven festival bona fide. She's great live, and when your pop album feels so tropical, so forward-thinking, and so gorgeously produced and pulling the glassy gems from hyperpop and shooting to the stars, you're getting a cut of magic. I can see this being one of those pop albums that actually stands the test of time in a decade or two, never getting the right appreciation in its era outside of the critics, but it's endlessly influential and it becomes popular kind of in retrospect. In the meantime, something special. Number 10. Whereas here, I'm not surprised that this struggled to make year-end list because it demanded you put in the work. And while it was daunting and difficult to revisit, it was worth it. The unfortunate comparison that Algiers will suffer to the self-titled debut and The Underside of Power is a function not just of the genre shifts, but making probably the most challenging album of their career, and not just in terms of the sound, as they branch further from post-punk and gospel towards more noise and sound collage and hip-hop on a record that can feel like a stalking behemoth. No, the real challenge came with the content, where instead of an influx of bangers that felt so righteous, Algiers expected you to do the reading for the structural and emotional struggles that come with proper systemic revolution, where it's not quite light on the other side, but a promise of something that means so much bigger even if it's complicated. I know there's a lot of folks who didn't care for the structure or the diminished populism, that is why it's kind of slipped a bit for me, but it's also one of those projects that only gets better the more you put into it, and throughout this entire year, worth staying shook. Number 9. Let's not mince words, I was really worried that when they changed labels this would not work. I was wrong. Oh, was I wrong? Svalbard signs to the closest thing to a major in metal music, and they deliver a project of pure, thunderous ear candy. And while I could nitpick some of the old texture that feels a little compromised in the shift in the low end, the choice to double down on anthemic melody means the band could actually focus and deliver something with more refinement and diversity in other areas. And I love the thematic arc, showing the nuance that comes in the choice and brutal reality of hiding one's pain and one's emotionality, and the crises of empathy in a larger world that will erupt from that, not just in how they can help others, but how they can best help and seek help for themselves. That's the benefit of having melodies this sweet. Despite how hard the journey is, at least the thunderous shredding can drag you forward. I'm a little bit annoyed this did not show up for more metalheads and rock fans on their list. I mean, it's the closest thing to mainstream rock that worked for me all damn year, but if you haven't heard it, I think this is a weight that is worth carrying. Number 8. I found this album very late in 2023, a lot later than I probably should have, and I still struggle to accurately describe it. There's just this feeling that I am missing context and I'm kind of getting it wrong, but the album's brilliant and I want to keep sharing it with everyone because maybe someone will have the context that I'm missing. And when I say brilliant, I mean it's this high on this list.
But first, you gotta shed that fear of passing away in order to live your life every day. You gotta shed that fear of passing away in order to live your life the right way.
I want to say Nourished by Time, this album, it's my top R&B project of 2023, but that would involve calling it R&B, and I don't think that's quite right. It's got touches that sound, sure, but there's also soul and 80s freestyle and hypnagogic pop with that outsider tinge that kind of reminds me of Ariel Pink, and I don't want to make that comparison because I'm fairly certain this guy was not at the Capitol on January 6th, but I love how it goes beyond that. I love how rock solid the compositions are here, within a texture that feels so unique, so gleaming and soulful, but also shambling and off-kilter, with a writing that's got so much character and thematic weight. I know this has been getting a lot of critical acclaim in very specific sectors, but it also feels like the sort of album you find in the weirder edges of the internet in a Bandcamp hole, and it's all the more special for the novelty, but also because it's really well written, it's really well performed. There's an organic character that really stuck for me. It's easily the strangest album I put on a year-end list, possibly ever, but I get the feeling more is coming from Nourished by Time, and I can't wait to hear it. Fantastic stuff. Number 7. It's a testament to how special this album is that even after it looks like she's clear on the other side and brighter things are on the horizon, the journey to finally get there remains this powerful.
Only love can save us now. Only love can save us now.
Kesha finished off her record deal with RCA and Kemosabe with perhaps not her best work, but by far her most important. Her most introspective and devastating. An experiment in psychedelic art pop that is unlike few things you'll ever hear, as it takes her deconstructed side to the absolute limit through a haze of grappling with abuse, being silenced, depression, and then being discarded by the industry that's treated you and your own art like garbage when you just wanted to be happy. But if this is trash, there's so much treasure at the core. Easily her most consistent production, courtesy of Rick Rubin, Kesha's most emotionally raw and evocative performances, and writing that will take you to that brink. And in 2024, as she teases a big single with Lil Nas X, Free of Your Abuser and the record label he owns, maybe brighter times are just around the corner. I'll take it. Number 6. The funny thing about making lists like this, at least for me, is that you're forced to consider themes that echo across a number of albums that you might not notice at the time, and you're noticing in an aggregate. So when I discovered this is one of multiple albums about trying to help someone through their own internal strife, with an isolated atmosphere that will touch upon Americana,
But you're not haunted. You just miss everything. You're not a ghost, so stop disappearing. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
I think everyone was a little worried when Spanish Love Songs pivoted from the pop punk and emo of Brave Faces Everyone to this. Not the least being that that album was one of the best of the decade thus far, will probably be winding up celebrated as a classic. I can't say this is on that level, but it's way closer than some have alleged, with the same rock-solid formula of killer vocals from Dylan Slocum, huge hooks, and the writing that just rip your guts out that remains at the core of this band. They just opted for the windswept, coarse Americana and indie rock that is a natural fit alongside Midwestern emo, willing not just to be self-critical, but also expand on the angst that's racked a project rooted in dire times. I can only hope the momentum keeps up, because when the best songs in this go so hard, and they show a willingness to embrace more complicated thematic depth and evolve their sound, hell, I'll find some joy in that. Number 5. When I first reviewed this album, I did not expect it to last and grow on me the way it did. Hell, in a different time when I gave out scores, this would probably have been stuck in some lower tier, and had some bizarre stubbornness allowing it to get this high, I probably would have refused. Thankfully, we've all grown and matured, right?
Stop scaring hoes, play that shit out and touch their toes. We don't wanna hear that red shit no more. What the fuck is that? Give me the mouse code. Stop scaring the hoes, play that shit out and touch their toes. We don't wanna hear that red shit no more. What the fuck is that? Give me the mouse code.
I'll I'll say it, this is my favorite rap album of the year, and only partially because I saw JPEG Mafia perform significant chunks of it live. And indeed, the mixing, it is something you gotta get through. Definitely a barrier to entry, but quite frankly, this album is all about those self-imposed barriers of good taste and decorum and not scaring the hoes, and then all that getting flattened with a wrecking ball. An utterly demented listen that wound up on my workout playlist persistently, and quite frankly, for anyone I could convince to play it with any regularity, especially at the gym, where the punchlines are hilarious and the production is wildly innovative, especially considering the constraints of the equipment that Peggy was using. And that's before Redveil shows up as the guest appearance. It fits into their world seamlessly, which only makes me so happy that he's got good people around him and he's going in this direction. Look, I know sometimes I give off this energy anyway. This album just makes me happy. In a year like this, I'll take that in spades. Number 4. And speaking of albums that I kind of needed this year, to the surprise of absolutely nobody who knows me,
It's 3:35 in the morning and I thought CBD would not get me high, but here I am thinking, what if Michael Keaton killed himself in multiplicity? Would that be genocide?
you can make a credible argument that this is Rustin Kelly's messiest album to date, from the sequencing to the production to its slapdash emotional core. That isn't a divorce album, but one of healing and reconciliation, and thus it makes all the sense in the world that it's messy as hell. Feels very lived in for that regard. But if there's a project where Rustin Kelly barrels forth into that desire to make something better, actually get some healing, damn all the cost, find that core within himself and trudge that cold black mile, it's this one, with some of his best ever hooks and songs to boot. And in a year where Rustin Kelly's presence doesn't actually feel that far away from what's breaking in the mainstream right now, I mean, he made the album to do it. There's gonna be a song or two that from this guy that's gonna go viral on TikTok inside, let's say, 2 years, beyond his cover of All Too Well. Y'all know it's probably coming. Be prepared. Number 3. I can't help but chuckle a bit to see this so high on my list. Not because it's not brilliant, it absolutely is. And if you talk to many indie country fans and critics worth their salt, it's either this or one other project on this list that took the top spot. If you know, you know. And while I'm not quite sure it's his best, it's the sort of project that felt like a leap we all knew he was capable of making. Just thrilling to see him stick the landing and get rewarded for it.
As the preacher gives the news, even Jesus has got the blues.
Gabe Lee's Drink the River is so special that I'm still floored Music Row has not decided to make him a thing. If the goddamn former president is putting him on the list of the best songs of 2023, how is Nashville still dropping the ball here? But enough of my whinging. For an album this warmly produced, homespun, overflowing with mature pathos and ride charm and gorgeous melody, Gabe Lee deserves better, and I want to see and hear it. It's the more settled side of honky tonk hell that I'll personally admit I might love a little more for the diversity of the Barn Burners, but Gabe Lee's songwriting chops have also grown by leaps and bounds. The production is stellar, where you almost don't notice how brisk of a listen it is for so much quality springing forth from it. If this was your favorite album this year, country or otherwise, I get it. Gabe Lee only keeps getting better, and he's only now seeing more recognition for it. Let's keep those opportunities wide open. Number 2. So I'll admit between this project and Gabe Lee, it's extremely close. Honestly, going back and forth for the past several months, mostly because despite their wildly different approach and sound and stylism and genre, there was some common ground. They're both rooted in traditionalism. They're both the most comfortable they have ever felt on record, with a genuine sense of humor. The production is utterly top-notch, and the best hooks, they just shine through with great charismatic performances at the core that anchor them. In the end, though, she might not have a better individual song, but as a whole,
Free yourself, keep on moving up that mountain top. Why don't you please yourself? It feels so good that don't you, baby, don't you stop.
I'll be honest, this came out of nowhere in 2023 for me. I was never into Jessie Ware before that year. I thought What's Your Pleasure was really overrated, but with That Feels Good, I finally got it. And this is my feel-good album in 2023. A throwback to 70s disco that is modern enough to explore some genre exploration into house, but also finally allows Jessie Ware to cut loose as a legit diva. The grooves are stellar, the arrangements are stunning, the writing hits that balance between cheeky, luxurious, and genuine yearning, and the compositional flow is masterful. I love the sequencing here. The sort of album that has you wondering why Jessie Ware wasn't doing this a decade ago. But truth be told, I know why. This sort of throwback would not have garnered the same sort of muted critical acclaim that she got early on. The pop zeitgeist is now firmly here on her side, and she has more than met the moment. I know for some it's too tasteful, it's a bit too much of a throwback. Trust someone who has inherited a legit stack of disco and R&B vinyl from his father. I know the differences, but even if she is that tasteful, this was an album that put a smile on my face every single time regardless. I'm not discounting any of that. And finally, number 1. There are years where I wonder, when I give it a perfect score, even in a time when I've discontinued scores, whether the album holds up, or whether I was premature in the assessment. Then I got to making the year-end list, and when I realized that outside of the 3 tracks I included among my best of 2023, I could have easily had 5 more credible entries and nobody would have argued, yeah, I'm comfortable saying I didn't make a mistake. Y'all know what's coming.
Swear you'll save the world when I lose my grip. Tell me you're in control.
This album feels not just like a culmination of a decade of emotional growth, but it contains multitudes, not just in terms of its sound and how much of it sprawls across classic rock, Americana, southern rock, and indie country, but the layered emotional dynamic that comes with someone reckoning with that bigger picture. If Reunions was kind of forcing it, Weather Vane shows Jason Isbell ready to take that dive. And when you factor in, he also took on production duties for his first time in over a decade, and the sound picks up so much more organic warmth and character and groove as the hooks pile in. Again, it was hard for me to pick the favorites, and everyone I shared this with both online and off it, they found their own favorites, and for wildly different reasons. And while in my review I commented on the thematic tragedy at this album's core, that for as much as Isbell seems aware of everything that can and must be done to make things better, he is just one very flawed man, and the power he's been granted would never have been enough. I think in retrospect it's not so much a tragedy, but understanding of where the wind must blow, where he cannot shape the passage, but he might be able to guide at least some sort of way. Yeah, best album of 2023. I don't think it's particularly close. And while I did give it a perfect score, and I think it could very well become a classic, time can make fools of us all. Isbell knows that for sure. For now, let's hope that the miles of 2024 ahead of us satiate some dreams. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be very grateful. Hell, share this around. That's always great. If you want to drop lists in the comments section of what your favorite albums of the year are, I'd be more than happy to see it. Most often it's just going to expose everything I missed, because hey, that happens. Beyond that though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to start getting albums on my schedule for 2024, or just support the channel, or argue with me in my Discord, link to my Patreon is right over there. Don't feel obligated, tough times, but the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark. You're watching Spectrum Pulse. Hope you all have a good new year, and I'll see you next time.